Are you constantly seeking your mother's approval instead of your own fulfillment? Do you struggle to set boundaries with your mom? Do you suspect that your mom might be a narcissist or emotionally immature? In this episode, I speak to Catherine Fabrizio. Catherine is a psychotherapist, mother, and the author of the best-selling book, The Good Daughter Syndrome: Help for Empathetic Daughters of Narcissist, Borderline, or Difficult Mothers Trapped in the Role of the Good Daughter. In this episode, you will learn what the good daughter syndrome is and how to break free from this role and start living a life that is designed for you. I know that this topic is super relevant to many of my listeners, so please enjoy this episode of Full and Thriving. Hello, Catherine. Welcome to the show.
Hello. It's so good to be here.
I am so grateful to have you here today. I have to tell you, when I heard about the good daughter syndrome, which is what we'll be talking about today, my mind was blown because it is so relevant to so many listeners who listen to this show. So thank you so much for joining and being able to share on this topic.
Yes, I'm excited to do so.
Oh, it's going to be great. So before we dive into this idea of the good daughter syndrome, I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your background, maybe personally and professionally.
Okay, well, this is not my story, but this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a daughter, sometimes recovering good daughter. I'm a mother to two grown daughters and a grandmother. And I've been a psychotherapist for 35 years. So that's who I am professionally. Yeah. And I started writing about this good daughter syndrome, I would say 7 years ago, blogging about it. And I kind of made up the concept, discovered the concept, gave it a name. And just there were other good daughters out there besides the ones in my practice. So then I wrote the book. It came out in March of 23. And it's gained a lot of traction. So it's a thing. It's a real thing. It's an archetype, really.
I would love to hear more about that. So first of all, can you tell me what the good daughter syndrome is? Like, what is that archetype? And how does it typically manifest in mother-daughter relationships?
Okay. So a thumbnail version would be, because it's such a broad concept, but it's when a daughter sacrifices and tries to please and make sure her mother's okay, and she loses herself in the process. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg. Maybe another layer down would be the explanation. And when you have an attuned, sensitive, empathetic daughter who's raised by a difficult, again, that's a big umbrella, but emotionally immature, insecure, easily dysregulated, difficult mother, the daughter adapts and accommodates to mom's needs, the mom adapting to the child's needs. Again, needs, big umbrella, but this is throughout development and throughout time, such that when the daughter grows up and is an adult, she's psychologically preoccupied with her mother's well-being in ways that take her, away from her own life and her own sense of becoming her own person.
Thank you for that general overview. I'm really curious, as your years as a psychotherapist, how did you see this in your practice? And how did you, basically it's a double-parted question, because I assume this is what informed the creation and origination of the good daughter syndrome. Could you share a little bit about that process?
So what's interesting, when you buy a car, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't know if other psychotherapists would say this, but when you're discovering something about yourself, I don't know if it's the universe at work or whatever, but I kept seeing this show up in my practice. So there were daughters that either had found themselves in imbalanced relationships, like romantic relationships narcissism wasn't even talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what we now would say, maybe with narcissistic partners, or many times they would have eating disorders, or they would struggle with perfectionism. And nobody thought that they had a problem with mom. So lots of times I would dig into it. And what I would find and discover is that these family dynamics, and many times a mother daughter relationship, was kind of out of whack. And that was the original template for the people pleasing, perfectionism, the acting in, just eating disorders and kind of that group of things rather than acting out. And I thought it was interesting because in the psychological community, those daughters didn't end up, in trouble or looking like they had a problem. Initially, this was like 40 years ago, because they were making everybody else happy. So what was their, deal? But they were so unhappy. And I would say 30 years ago, I would many times see a client who would come in and they would say, you're the second therapist who's mentioned my mother might have narcissistic tendencies or borderline tendencies, because the first time a therapist said that, I left that therapist right away. It was so taboo, 30 years ago. Boundaries, nobody used that word. So nobody knew that was a thing or that was a healthy thing to have in relationship with your mom. So many times I would be the second therapist that they would come see. And I hit it at about early 30s. And so then, and I can tell that story, which I think is interesting. But then I started to see it with clients, and I would try this and try that and studied it and brought in different modalities to attend to it. And so over time, I became really good at helping to heal this one thing. And so, I like to say, it's a struggle and it's a journey. There's no quick fix, but I can probably shorten the learning curve because I know so many things that don't work.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm sure, because when I see this in my practice, first of all, it's usually a very common underlying factor, having this really unhealthy mother-daughter dynamic where the daughter's trying to please her mother, or, in eating disorders, it's like constantly worrying about being judged in her appearance even. And it really shapes the psyche on a deep level. And yeah, I find it fascinating that you were able to really dig deep on this. And you mentioned the concept acting in versus acting out. Do you find that these daughters are mostly acting in? And if so, what do you mean by that?
Definitely. So, and I'll kind of dive in deep. So if mother is dysregulated, familiar with most of us are these days, then the daughter very early on learns to adapt. So she's attending to mom. And so she becomes the agent of regulation. She's regulating, mom's regulating through her. So in doing so, the good daughter, as opposed to the scapegoat, just says, I'm going to be a big mess. And I'm going to call attention to all my problems. And you're going to be bailing me out of jail and putting me in treatment, for addictions and basically causing the chaos. Whereas the good daughter is usually repressing her needs, is constricting, is getting smaller. Because when you have an enmeshed relationship and two people have to fit in space for one, and one person has all the needs, mom has all the needs, then the good daughter gets smaller and smaller. So that's acting in. They try to be better and better to try and please mom. Don't rock the boat. be mom's walking, talking PR billboard. Look, my mother must be such a good mother because look how I turned out, world. And there's less and less room for a daughter to make mistakes and then I'll be the end of the world, to eat what she wants because she's hungry. I mean, if you repress one set of needs, I don't think you get to pick and choose which one you're going to pull out of awareness.
Mhm.
So if a person at a basic level is trying to get smaller and have fewer needs, then why wouldn't hunger go with that?
Yeah.
Then why
Wow.
wouldn't expression of anger or rebellion?
Mm.
Good daughters even go through adolescence. They're like, why? It never caused any trouble. I came in before my curfew. Not every good daughter. I was not that way, I'll say. When I went to ladies, I looked like that on the outside. All my teachers thought I was that person. My mother thought I was that person. But I was busy acting out in some, not terribly, but in some ways. Anyway, so that's what I mean by acting in. They're more like the face of, so narcissistic mom can appropriate her daughter, and you are what the world is seeing and making me look good. Moms who have borderline personality disorder have those defenses, are more needy and clingy and kind of interpersonally chaotic. And so the good daughter kind of brings stability to that mom. There are all kinds of nuances and variations on a theme, and that's why I call it archetypal theme,
Yep.
because our patterns, like a scattergram, they're patterns that you can see.
Yeah.
Not that everybody's going to follow the same trajectory.
Could you share an example or a few examples of what a daughter might do to regulate her mom or what does that look like? Like, what is the daughter doing to kind of steady this chaos within the mom?
Mhm. Okay, so we'll even start with a narcissistic mom and what I call the never good enough trap.
Mm.
If mom needs to be superior and relevant, her daughter needs to think, I say she signs this unconscious contract when she's little, needs to think, mom's always right, mom knows best. But the problem is the goalpost keeps on getting moved. So the daughter tries to be better and better because there's no level of perfection that actually satisfies mom,
Mm.
because it's not going to cure her narcissism,
Yeah.
because
Wow.
that's within her. You might supply her with something that makes her feel good, but you're not going to cure it. So a daughter many times is, getting the A+, exhausting herself, has the perfect kids who are dressed perfectly in the perfect school and lives in the perfect neighborhood and marries the perfect man, or is constantly fixed or improved on, or mom's telling her stuff for her own good about how to raise her kids or who to choose for a life partner. So she gets a feeling that mistakes are devastating.
Mm. Mm.
Because mom needs her so much to be a reflection of her, or needs to be able to tell her what to do and be right, that underneath it all, she's aware if she messes up, that's going to upset the whole apple cart.
So I assume that the message of I need to be perfect, I can't make mistakes is very strong in this relationship.
It takes on an import that is hard to understand if you're just dealing with the logic brain.
Mhm.
As you probably
So,
know, you go ahead.
yeah, what would happen if this good daughter does make a mistake? Like, what typically happens? Like, what does that dynamic look like with the mom?
A lot of daughters will tell me, mom's very supportive in public. She brags about me to her friends, but behind closed doors, there's no holds barred. She's relentless. She micromanages me. She read my texts when I was younger. She picked my friends. She picked apart my boyfriend. she wants to know everything that's going on between me and my husband. She's critical of my husband. She wants to be the main emotional partner. And again, I'm describing kind of an extreme end of the spectrum. There are all kinds of variations, step back. But
Mhm.
the true narcissistic mom is going to, the extreme end is going to look like that.
Wow.
Or say a borderline or a mom who has borderline defenses is going to be triggered when her daughter tries to establish independence or her own sovereignty.
Interesting. So,
Yep.
can you explain what that would look like?
Yes. So that's the mom who hangs on the phone for hours and hours, calling her daughter, needing her daughter to be her sounding board or her therapist or her ally in all the disappointing relationships she's had. She has no boundaries. The daughter's not respected as having her own sovereign life. Many times they're trying to raise young kids, they're trying to work out a marriage, a career, and they're getting texts throughout the day from their mother, call me as soon as you can. There's always a sense of urgency. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lack of respect that the daughter's trying to live her own life, or that the daughter needs a sense of privacy or even room to make a mistake or to think about things or to be in a relationship that doesn't work out and come to her own conclusion about that.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because when I talk to individuals who have challenging relationships with their mom, it's almost like they go their whole lives thinking this is normal. And then one day they wake up and it's all kind of blowing up in their face. And I know you kind of mentioned you had your own story and that you started noticing it in your 30s, right? Was
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
you share like kind of that, your own story and that awareness that probably came about?
So if we time travel about 30, now 35 years ago, you would find me married to a nice man. I just graduated, got my degree in psychology, and had two beautiful children, had just started a practice with my mother. And I was
Was that warning sign number one?
red flag number one.
Yeah.
Well, I thought she was right about everything, including and she was a very smart person. She had a PhD in psychology. I mean, who's going to argue with that, right? And she was a
Mhm.
debate champ. She was charismatic and a lot of good things also. But everybody would say we were two peas in the pod, but one pea was always in charge. And I found myself really paralyzed with depression. Like, who knew? I had everything from the outside looking in. And I didn't really know what I thought. And I would cry at the drop of a hat. For I didn't know why. I didn't know what I thought, but I knew in a nanosecond if she was okay and if she was okay with me. So looking back, it was the emotional relationship that counted. And she was very demanding. Like I said, knew exactly what I should do about everything, directed a lot of my life, and was pleased with me much of the time. But anyway, so I got into psychotherapy as one dog. What the hell's going on? And I had this very gentle, lovely psychotherapist who kind of gently prodded me in this direction. And so I figured out what was going on. And I walked into the office that we shared with my heart in my throat. And I said, Mom, I've got to leave home. I'm leaving the practice. It was almost like a disembodied voice. I could hear like these words, wah, 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 came what was I practiced, but I was terrified. And I knew it would break her heart. I knew there was no easy way to do it, but staying was going to break me.
Mm.
And that was the beginning. I would love to say, this Hollywood moment, and then forever after we were happily, individuated. But it took effort, it took time, it took revisiting the same conversation over and over again. And she could even grasp it intellectually sometimes that I needed to differentiate and become my own person. But I think she was a perfect mother for me because almost any snafu or cul-de-sac people run into, I've been there and I can shorten the learning curve and I can say, you're wasting your time. And this is like a shortcut. It's still going to be hard. But
Yeah.
at that time,
I
like I said, nobody knew about boundaries, and narcissists were just obnoxious men who bragged about themselves all the time.
Right, right. The definition has definitely
Yeah.
evolved.
Yeah.
Um, so when you walked in and kind of exclaimed your need to differentiate, like, I'm leaving the practice, I need to move out of the practice,
Mhm.
how did you react?
Stunned, angry, argumentative. I mean, all the guilt trip.
Mm.
What did I do wrong? I guess I must be a horrible mother. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to make it on your own. The fear, the self doubt, and then kind of pulling it apart financially and stuff was very hard. Some
So
bullying.
can you share with me? That sounds really, first of all, really tough. I'm really happy you were able to eventually work through that. Can you
Yeah.
share a bit about this guilt trip? Because I know that you've mentioned guilt is probably the number one emotion that keeps daughters trapped in these dysfunctional dynamics. So, why is that?
Well, I think it's multifaceted. First, you have the culture telling you nobody loves you like your mother. And so when you feel like you're going up against this cultural norm that you just taboo, that you don't mess with, there's not reason. I mean, there's not room for the reality that you're two different people, that you need two different things. She may love you very much. She may be so impaired, though, that she cannot support your differentiation and development. So, so you've got it coming from the culture. Then
Mhm.
you usually got it coming from the family system. Don't make your mother mad. The sibling who is not having to deal as much with mom. Like, what are you doing? Kind of, that's my role, to break away from mom. No, you need to go and take care of her. Um, or dad who says, you just know how she is. Go and make up with your mom. That's actually huge. My parents were divorced. That didn't come into play, but I hear that a lot from clients. And again, I'm talking about the awareness side of the equation.
Mhm.
So when you've been trained from a early on time, that your emotional regulation is actually so tied to mom being okay and being okay with you, which is, what we used to say. Now we say emotional regulation. You can become prepared that you're going to rock the boat. It's not going to feel good, not for a long time. So you
Mhm.
have to be prepared with a lot of reasons why you're going to do this. If you're withholding supply from your mom, she's not going to go along with it. You're not going to be able to explain. And I'll get into in a little bit about what not to do. But
Mhm.
there's so many ways in which people try to do this without feeling guilty. And thank you, somatic work that we have these days, but you can feel guilty and not be guilty, are guilty of disrupting a pattern of expectations. So I guess I don't agree with people that say, oh, well, you're not guilty. So just don't have that feeling. No, we
Yeah.
know if we're conditioned to have, from Pavlov, days of Pavlov, we know if we're conditioned to have a response, we're going to have a biological sensation of guilt too, you know?
Wow. So this feeling of guilt is very real and legitimate because that's what you've been patterned to feel.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that somatic work can really help move through the guilt, help a person move through that guilt.
I think it's multifaceted. It's top down and bottom up. It's knowing, okay, let me understand about the culture. And there are plenty of good writers about that. Even though the patriarchy comes through, disempower women. And so the women become mothers and maybe they get their power through the children that they bear.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Yeah,
so
that is.
More cultural, which can also be saying different patriarchal Indian cultures sometimes, or lots of cultures kind of, we're going to give you power over the children. We're not going to give you power out there, but we're going to give you more over your children and particularly your daughters. And they have to make you, we're going to put all the pressure on you. They have to make you happy. So so you understand this bigger cultural context. So that's one set, guilt. Then you come to understand family systems, that a really problematic person in the family system affects everybody in that system. And when the good daughter is doing the brunt of the work, nobody else is going to be happy when she says, I'm done. Tag, you're it.
Yeah.
You make mom happy. You make her feel special. You do her bidding. You hang on the phone with her for hours trying to talk her off the ledge. If that happens. So then you educate yourself. When I rock the boat, it's going to cause I'm going to get seismic reverberations. Biologically, you've been trained. Your survival brain, as a baby, your very survival is based on making this bond work. Now, we're not Aboriginal cultures anymore, but our evolutionary brain doesn't know that.
Right.
If we lose the caretaking of our dependent, we're going to starve to death. We're not going to be protected from predators. So we're going to feel guilty and kind of that feeling of I'm in trouble. Every good daughter resonates with that. Oh, crap. I'm in trouble. I could be 60 years old and that feeling. I'm 5 again. I'm in trouble with mom and I'll do anything to get out of this feeling. And I'm a bad person when the guilt gets coupled with shame.
Oh my goodness. It sounds devastating for the good daughter, right? All of this emotional impact through a lifetime.
Yeah. Yes. And that's the other thing. If it's just been the way that you and mom roll, then you don't know it's a problem. How would you know it's a problem? Until maybe you're at your best friend's house and her mother let you alone, or let your best friend play the kind of music she wanted to play, or shave her legs, or, wear makeup. Within bounds, maybe your best friend's mother didn't micromanage everything or read all your text, read all your friends' text. So you might have these kind of glimmers into other lifestyles. I think nowadays, boundaries are good. So the good daughter's like, what? You can do that? What? I shouldn't? What? I've never said that to my mother. That's the number one phrase I hear.
Yes. So this awakening of just realizing this pattern must be just emotionally really difficult to break through. And what are your thoughts? When this person has this realization, when is it appropriate to heal the relationship? Or when is it appropriate to let go or set really hard boundaries?
Right. That's a tough one, but I think such an important question, because the tendency is to say, okay, I read a blog, my mother's a narcissist, so I'm going to go no contact. And you can
That's the tendency. You feel like that's that's first reaction typically?
I think that's a very reactive stance. It's an understandable reaction. Either that, or I could never say any of that. this person just doesn't know my mother. So what I caution or encourage people to do, besides the awareness piece, is to pick a very small, doable boundary. And whatever you get back is data you can use. So for you that may be, I'm not going to gossip about my husband, or I'm not going to tell you everything, Mom, or I'm going to say something about unwanted advice about how to raise my kids. But something that feels like your nervous system can handle. You can imagine yourself doing that. And then what usually happens when a person introduces this boundary, so you might start off with a positive statement. Say it's about your weight. I'll use that one. That's a good one. Mom, I know it probably was okay in your day, but it makes me feel uncomfortable when you make comments about my weight. That's a very soft relational boundary. Second time, when Mom, and most moms, if they're reasonable, they might be just like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. I'm sorry. Yeah, we do things differently, and that's a good thing for women. I mean, even my own daughters, I've got grown daughters, and say, oh, you look so fit. So, Mom, we don't comment on that. So I had to learn.
Yep.
Don't even say something positive, because that's not what we do nowadays. Wow, you're right. Okay, I've learned. So then you get data. Okay, well, maybe I can, mention some other things. Maybe I don't want to come every Thanksgiving, maybe every other Thanksgiving. Or, then you can build on that, because a mom with some emotional resilience is going to want to have a better relationship with her daughter. And she can take the hit of being corrected. It always stings, I can tell you, but she can take the hit for the potential growth. So next kind of mom, she mentions your weight again, and you say, Mom, I've mentioned this, but it makes me feel really uncomfortable when you talk about my weight. I'm going to ask you one more time, just not talk about it. Okay, so you've had to go in there with a firmer boundary. If she comes back, I guess I'm just a horrible mother. I guess what else did I do wrong? Do you want to read me the riot act about everything I've done wrong? You think you're so smart. I mean, if she really comes back at you, that's data. So if you could kind of reframe it, okay, whatever reaction I get, it doesn't mean that it didn't work. So lots of daughters will say, I tried to set a boundary, it didn't work. I'm like, well, it did. It just didn't work in the way that you want it to. So let's say third type of mom says, I don't care what you think, but I'm going to comment on your weight because I know best. And then maybe a third boundary is say, well, if that's your choice, we're going to be spending a lot less time together and I'm going to leave. And that's a power boundary. That's like saying, this is the consequence. I mean, going with a power boundary first is kind of, too much. Or to stay with the soft boundary forever. Mom, I've told you for the 100th time, please don't talk about my weight. That. So it's a process.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing like the different levels of boundaries. What happens when a mom just keeps violating those boundaries?
Okay. So there are moms, and I never want to leave this out, because there are people who are so narcissistic. They're maybe on the sociopathic end of the spectrum, or they've had so much trauma, they are just stuck in one way. They're just reactive and are not likely to act any other way. So once had this client whose mom was still drinking, still picking up chips. She would break in lines. She would park in handicapped parking lot. She would drive the kids around while she was high. She would, anything this daughter said, she would just come back at her. This is a person who's not going to change. And that daughter ended up cutting off contact. because no matter what she did, and again, she got the data, this personality disorder was not about to act relationally. The rules were not meant for her. She was not going to change. There was no remorse. There was no accountability. And unfortunately, just because you're a mom doesn't mean that you're like not that person. You can still be that person. And if you're that daughter, then over time, I think you have to do it thoughtfully, but it doesn't do you any favors
Mm,
to stay in a relationship with somebody who is just abusive and has no interest in changing.
mm. So that might be one of the keys in making the assessment. Is this person invested and interested in a
Or
change? And if they really don't care, that's kind of a red flag.
if they're not capable of it, like if psychologists
Mm,
make a diagnosis, and I've got mixed feelings about diagnoses, but a personality disorder is diagnosed if something is persistent and pervasive. And I think those two
mhm.
words are useful. Is it persistent over time? And is it pervasive? Like, is this person this way really with everybody? Does she run everybody off? Is she exploited with all her friends? Uh, you know,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
thank you for explaining all of that. I have one other big question that I would love to dive into with you. And it's related to the steps people can take to kind of start reclaiming their freedom. You mentioned boundaries. I think that's a really good place to start. You've also kind of mentioned you have these hacks that shorten the learning curve. I'm curious if you could share I'm assuming those are those steps to help reclaiming
Right.
freedom in a
So
way.
we've got the awareness, the education, and then, this is possibly not going to sound that much, but eventually you stop focusing on the other person, because if the other person being mom, and hoping she'll change, and hoping to state it just right, to state your boundary just right, and be very focused on her, and turn the mirror back and think, oh, where does this dynamic happen in my entire life? Am I really living the life, the full life, an expansive life? Like, where am I living in a constricted way? And where can I expand and live a more full life? Where am I
Mm.
pleasing? Where am I? What risks do I want to take if I wasn't afraid of failure and mom's eyes on me? And it's kind of like the answer is so pervasive to stop living in comparison, to value following your own particular special gifts, not just what you're good at and make the A or the most dollars or whatever your currency is, but what fulfills you as a person. And I love your full and thriving. I mean, that's the solution, isn't it?
I love that. Yes, it is. It
Oh,
really is. That's why I picked the title because it's like I want everyone to feel like they're living a full, vibrant, thriving life. After they listen to these episodes, they learn how to get a little bit more close to that outcome. And so I love it. So you're saying essentially turn the mirror towards yourself and start focusing on you, maybe for the
the
first
first
time
time.
ever.
It's interesting too with that title. I tell you another thought I had. Um, what I'm
Mhm.
talking about is somebody's emptiness. So mom's emptiness. If
Oh,
she's narcissistic or borderline, she's wounded in a certain way. The good daughter's trying to fill her up, which is an impossible quest because she's like a bucket with a hole in it. Yes, you could fill her up, but you're going to have to keep on refilling. So
yeah.
when you
Yeah.
rock that boat and you say, I'm not going to fill you up anymore, guess what you're going to do? You're going to look at your own emptiness. Where am I unfulfilled? Again, what risks do I want to take? What pleasures do I want to have? And that's where you can really make a difference, right? Instead of organizing
Yeah.
yourself around somebody else's emptiness, embrace your own fullness and all these. It can take so many different forms, and you talk about all of them.
I find that so inspiring and exciting to think about people listening and potentially seeking their own fullness in life. And I'm really curious about yours. What was it like for you for the first time to have that awareness of like, I can feel my, and I can tap into me and what makes me feel good. What was that like?
It was so awakening. That's overused word, but I've really embraced the expressive arts. I love to sing. I love to dance. I'm an exhibiting artist. That is, where my heart is. I've loved being a mom, not the sacrificial parts of it so much, but really honing your skills and say, what are your gifts? And my gifts don't have to be other people's gifts, but kind of okay, my mother was the way that she was in her lifetime, her typology and the Enneagrams. She was more of a 1, a reformer, and kind of having acceptance for other people. Like that's fine for you, but to really realize and to not siphon off that energy to, again, try to fill somebody else's cup or expectation of you. You do have more energy for yourself. And then you realize I can't do everything. And maybe I won't work to make the most money or have the most efficiently run household or have the most accomplished children. It's more important to me that they feel loved and cared for and, have connection. I mean, those are very practical. As a mom, I think you ever want to be connected. Ever want to be married.
Wow.
That's a good question. But as a mother,
Did you have to take a deep look at yourself when you became a mother? And was it hard for you to learn how to be a healthy mom because your example was not so healthy?
I'll give a brutally honest, I don't think I've ever talked about this before, but I had a really bad postpartum depression because I had given so much of myself to my mother. And then this infant came along, and I've heard this from other women. It was like, when's it ever going to be my turn? Now this person who's dependent on me, and I've got a dependent mother, and I'm suffocating. Where's there going to be room for me? So it was partly part of this kind of awakening. And
wow, that is heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is heavy. Thank you for sharing that. So what did you end up doing? Did it motivate you to kind of cut those entangled and focus more on being
the beginning of that kind of awakening? And it hit me as I was raising all those moments. I can either criticize or try to make them better, or I can help them feel accepted, not indulge. I was kind of strict. Actually, that surprises people. But if their teacher's going to fail if she doesn't turn this project in, I would say that's her project. It's not mine. So it helped me get really clear. And I have a lot of thoughts about that. And each step of the way was both freeing and difficult because it, go right or go left, like those kinds of moments.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you're saying, do you want your kid to be perfect or do you want them to feel connected? Something like that you shared. But I think aiming towards that, like fostering that feeling of love and connection is a much more healthier place to move towards.
I mean, and I didn't get it perfectly at all. And so I can feel the pull that a narcissistic mother feels. Like I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Not the cruelty, but and there was a moment, my granddaughter who was birthday party, and she took one bite of a cupcake and she had chocolate smeared, across her face. And of course, everybody's taking pictures. And I picked up like a paper towel to wipe her face. And my daughter looked at me like, don't you dare. And I said, that's what I mean. Like, I wanted her pictures to look nice. And God bless my daughter who said, no, we're not going to do that. The pictures are going to look the way they're going to look. And she's fine. She doesn't care that there's chocolate smeared across her face. She's enjoyed that cupcake.
Mm-hmm.
So, those are like real.
Well, yeah, it's like a small example of healing and feeling the impulse and like awareness. You've done the work to notice those moments and respond instead of react.
Yeah.
And it's not about you. It's not about how good your granddaughter looks in those pictures. It's about her moment and her birthday and enjoying her cupcake. So thank you for sharing. That's so helpful. And this conversation has totally flown by. I'm really curious, Catherine, if, as we conclude the conversation, could you share maybe where people can find your work, if they want to reach out to you or if they want to read your book? Like, how can they access your support?
So the only thing you have to remember is the good daughter syndrome. Don't even have to remember my name. If you think you might be caught in this good daughter syndrome, if you Google that phrase, I have a quiz. That's a good place to start. So you take the quiz and then you're on my email list, which you can opt out of if you'd like. But then you'll get an email and it'll tell you the title of the book. The Good Daughter Syndrome is also of the book. And that's how you kind of get into that system with me. I've got coaching and online course. But first see if this really applies to you. And it's a continuum. There's some people who they just need to get over that developmental. Mom needs to do some work and they pull away and, they can do it and have a better relationship. That's not often the case. If you really resonate with it, it's a journey of a lot of awareness, but I feel like I can help people go through the journey and still feel like a good person.
I think you must be, I know just after talking to you, you are an incredible resource for people going through this. And it sounds like you have the power to really help people. And I know there are listeners who are struggling with this dynamic. And so I just want to say thank you so much for joining me on the show today, teaching all of us so much. And I will definitely, if you send me the link, the quiz, I can put it in the show notes so listeners can just link to that as soon as they learn of it.
Well, thank you for your thoughtful questions. You're so in tune with this whole it shows. Yeah. And you're helping people live full and thriving lives, because that really is the answer, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Well, thank you so much. It means a lot. I do try to stay present with my guests and ask questions. So I'm grateful you noticed that. And thanks again. And I will talk to you soon. So there you have it. Another episode of Full and Thriving in the Books. I want to personally thank you for joining me in listening to today's show. And if you found value in this conversation, I would be so grateful if you could please take a moment to subscribe to the show and leave a review. Your support not only helps us reach more people who are striving to live their most full and thriving life, but it also allows us to bring on even more incredible guests with valuable insights that can change your life. Every follow, every review makes a huge difference, and together we can continue to grow this beautiful community. Thanks again for being a part of the journey, and we'll see you next time on Full and Thriving.